But let's get into some of the news coming out on the day. We're crossing to Nairobi. Elizabeth Irungu, investment manager at Stanlib Kenya, is our market watcher, standing by from Nairobi, as you can see there. Elizabeth, thanks for your time. So let's just get straight into some of the news today, because one of the more interesting stories is the decision by government to offload some of its assets, and the first being its 26% stake in Kenya Wine Agencies, looking to sell that to Distil South Africa. This has been on the card since 2011, and many saying it's a good move, looking to privatize companies or assets that aren't seen as strategic in nature. But what's your thought on how this is going to shape up the competitive landscape in the spirits industry in Kenya?
Thank you. I think that's very good news for us in Kenya. Government has been wanting to sell portions of the companies that they own, Kwal being one of them. It's been on the shelf for quite some time, and this comes at a good time when we have a new regime coming into government, and we are seeing that the government needs a lot of money to actually bring on board all the activities and all the development agenda that has been put on the table. So this is good for the country. It will bring in revenues that are quite needed. They've been borrowing quite a bit from the market, and this is going to actually bring some more revenue for the government, and therefore ease on the borrowing pressure that the government has, or the CBK has been having over the last couple of months or years.
Mm-hmm. But let's look, more generally at what's taking place, I suppose, in the spirits space in Africa, because there seems to be more attention coming from all the alcoholic companies when it comes to putting resources towards this. We know that Brand House in South Africa is competing more specifically under the Diageo banner, who've opened up an African spirits division. But for example, in Kenya, if you have Distil South Africa having exclusive rights, that really locks out the likes of Diageo. So I wonder what competitors would be thinking about this specific deal.
In terms of the competitiveness, we can talk about Kwal being one of the leading producers of wines. And if you looked at, for example, the East Africa breweries, their sales have been growing on the wine, from the wine side of things. And therefore, the acquisition of Distil of 26% of Kwal is a good initiative coming from a South African business that has more experience, that has more exposure. It brings in a lot of synergies that I think will drive the industry, the breweries industry, even to a greater level. So it is good for the local businesses, and I see it as a positive for the whole industry.
Mm-hmm. To up their game. Let's talk about some other stocks that have been interesting when it comes to some movements today. We've seen a slide in Kenya Airways stock. That's on the back of the announcement of the termination of a Travelport franchise. How important a part of that business was it for KQ?
I think Kenya Airways, the slide was very minimal, and I think it was it's just the fears that come from investors hearing that Kenya Airways has terminated the franchise, a franchise that they have been having since 1997. I do not think personally that this will have a large impact on their top line in terms of revenues, and it shouldn't impact so negatively to the share price of Kenya Airways. So I think the correction was just before the full digestion of the news into the market, and therefore on a top level it means that revenues could go down, but largely I think the impact will not be so huge so as to affect the business significantly.
Mm-hmm. We're looking at the agricultural space. Certainly some good news coming from the tea sector. Tea output jumping by 67% year on year during this period. And it's basically, of course, just been favorable weather. But overall, what that does mean is that tea earnings in Kenya could rise by 4% to 116 billion shillings this year. So that, of course, is good news, as you say, for a government that's looking to offload assets to boost its coffers and has been turning to the market more and more for borrowing.
Yes, that's very good news for Sasini there. The output for tea is expected to rise significantly. This is because of the good weather, like you have stated. And even though Sasini reported lower earnings than in the financial year 2012, we are seeing more investors seeing the value driver being higher output in the coming months, and the pricing also holding well. And that is the main reason that investors are putting into pushing the price of Sasini higher and higher every day. I think it is not too much. I think it is within the fundamentals for somebody to expect that the earnings are going to be improved, and largely largely to the benefit of the shareholders who are in this particular counter.
But certainly not for the faint-hearted, the agricultural stocks, given the fact that weather is so unpredictable and the stocks as a result so volatile. What's your view on investing in agricultural counters on the NSE?
Personally, I'm not very, I don't like volatility a lot, so I would say that investing in the agriculturals, it's a dicey segment in the Nairobi Securities Exchange, mainly because of how the prices move, and largely also because of the over dependence on rainfall, which can go any direction. So it needs an investor who is very keen and who has full understanding of the agricultural sector for them to make a very good decision on when to get in or when to get out. So for me, I would say for investors who are risk takers and who understand the weather patterns very well, we don't have a very good analysis of our weather. Unfortunately, they need to get in cautiously into those stocks.
Just lastly, to end off on, of course, we know now that Uhuru Kenyatta is now going to be the president. That's after the Supreme Court ruling, but he has to make good on his promises during his election campaign. And as a result, they're increasing the budget deficit by another 27 billion shillings. It's going to be around 165 billion shillings now. How big a portion of GDP is that going to be? Are there views that this is sustainable budget deficit they're looking at right now?
Yes, we've seen this week that the Treasury has increased the budget deficit by 27 billion shillings more, and largely to incorporate or to bring on board some of the programs that the new government wants to roll out. The impact of this is that domestic borrowing is likely to be more elevated, and of course that will feed into the interest rate environment. For as long as this government is borrowing more and more, then you find that investors, having seen the appetite that government has for local funding, they'll continue to demand higher earnings. However, as an analyst, how I look at it is that the use of these funds, it will impact on the overall performance of the economy, and if the funds are going to capital expenditure, then that is good because it expands the output of the country, and the spiral effects becomes more positive, and therefore it could actually go into unwinding the borrowing pressure that the government has, as long as we are growing the output levels of the country. So really, I look at it more positively, and if the use is right and into the capital expenditure, I do not see it as a big concern as for now. I actually like it.